Okay, do you see it? You guys all see it? Okay, so if you ever miss a lecture, that's what you do. You type violence in the Bible, you put my name, and boom, you have whatever lecture we did that you missed. So. Okay. All right, let's go into today. So this is my recording, yes. It's the second part of the introduction. So, and then we have one last introduction, but focused on the book of Genesis. So right now it's just still general introduction to, but I'm going to focus today on how to read the biblical text in a way that doesn't do violence, since we're talking about violence, in a way that doesn't do violence to the biblical text, right? We have to read the biblical text in its proper context to really understand it. Let me give you an example of what I mean by that. Give me an example of something taken out of context that would then be misunderstood because it's been taken out of context. Anybody have an idea? Yeah, anything, sure.
Conversations in text in general.
Right. There was a context and somebody said, give me an example, concrete, exact, like somebody says what? Like, I hate QC, right? Queens College, but it's like in the context of, what could be the context? Oh, I hate QC when thing, what's it called? Brightboard, but what's it called? The stupid website. When the website breaks down on the first day of class, I hate QC, right? So in the context, you're talking about the website, but people might take it like, oh, it means this, right? So do you have another example?
Mistaking kindness for weakness.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay. So you're being kind in a certain context, people don't see that and they see it as weakness, right? Now let's look at more deeply an art form that an art form that is art, right? But taken out of context, it can mean something else or it can be misunderstood. Yeah.
And satire, if you don't understand that it's satire, it could be seen as, racist or
Very
whatever
good.
it is. Right.
Absolutely, right? You need to have the context, right? Otherwise, you're going to miss the meaning, right? You also need to know what genre the person is talking in, right? So it's the same in the biblical text. If you miss the genre, meaning, is it historical? Is it satire? We know, for example, Book of Jonah is satirical, Book of Job to a certain degree is comedic also. So we have to know the genre that it's in, and then we can understand. Here's a one taken from the hip hop culture that was very famous when I was growing up. And it was you'll help me with this rap group that made this song called Fuck the Police. Yes, you remember? Who were they? Who were they? Ice Cube? Okay, so now with scandalous, right? Don't listen to this, right? It's violent. It's against the police, God forbid, right? But so I saw the documentary on how that song arose, right? Actually, what the context had been was these were a group of kids who were at the time they were very young, and they had just been caught by the police unjustly, right? And they had been, I forgot, do you remember exactly the context of where they had this problem with the police, but there was an injustice there. And so out of rage, out of this context of injustice, they composed this song, fuck the police, da, da, da. And then of course, and then nobody knows the context. So they just think, look at these thugs, right? And don't see the context. This is how the Bible too often has been misinterpreted, right? We have the text, but we have the context. If you miss the context, you miss the text. In the same way that you can miss this rap song, right? If you miss the context, you're gonna judge it. You're gonna say, it's so violent, it's so this, it's so that, right? Make sense? Okay. So today we're gonna look a little bit at the context, the way that basically the way that trying to find my pages here would be nice. I could come up with a page that makes sense. Introduction to 1, 2, 3. Okay. Cool. Yes. So what we're going to look at now is the specific Hebraic worldview that we ought to adopt to understand the biblical text. Okay, let me say it again. What we're going to look at today is the Hebrew context of the Bible. If you don't understand the Hebraic way of thinking, you're not going to understand neither how to read the biblical text or how to interpret the biblical text. You're not going to get it at all, right? So it's very important to latch on to the Hebraic worldview. Too often we have read the text from a Western perspective, right? And we butcher the text in this way, right? You cannot read the biblical text from a Western perspective. I've noticed actually, so I've taught some of these classes in other parts of the world. It's interesting. When I'm in an African context or an Asian context, people are closer to the biblical worldview and they understand it better, right? It's very interesting because it's a similar worldview. The biblical worldview is closer to the African worldview or to the Eastern worldview than to the Western worldview. But sadly, too often, it's been Western exegetes, right, have been interpreting the text and, of course, getting a lot of it wrong. So we need to go back to the Hebrew roots of the Bible to understand. So let me introduce first one last time, right? Let me go over a little bit this notion of texts of terror, right? It's the title of the class. Let me remind us a little bit of the violence that is in the text and how not only the violence in the text, but how it is being used even today violently. It has been used in the past violently, and it is being used today violently, the biblical text. So in the text itself, we have violence, and then in the use of the text, you have violence. So let me just make the list now of the violent moments in the text that we mentioned last time. You have obvious violence against women. You have the violence, which is unquestioned in many texts, not all, right? You have violence against non-believers. You see this in the Hebrew, the wars in the book of Joshua, in the book of Deuteronomy. Anybody who's not Hebrew or who's a Canaanite is in trouble. You have violence against LGBT to a certain degree, right? You have a condemnation of homosexuality in the biblical text. You have violence against nature, right? So that's already in the text, which we're going to, of course, investigate, right? We have, again, the goal of this class is to go more deeply, right? To read more profoundly. But now we have also, and I didn't mention this last time, the biblical text has also been used too as a tool of violence, as a form of violence. And I'll give you a list of the past and present ways that the text is being used in a way that is deeply problematic. In the past, obviously, you have the Inquisition, the Crusades, right? The forced conversion of Jews and Muslims to Christianity through the biblical text, right? It was, they quote a few passages and demonize all the Jews, right? You have the famous passage in, I think maybe it's John, Gospel of John, where the Pharisees at the moment of the judgment of Jesus say, well, let his blood fall on us and our children. And this has been used for centuries to say, indeed, this blood will fall on you and on your children, right? And you will die now because of what you have done, right? So you have certain texts used to justify the oppression of Jews for centuries. By the way, the Inquisition is fascinating. I was in Latin America. Where was I? In Colombia. And I saw a museum of the Inquisition. I was like, they went this far, right? Because I thought the Inquisition was just for Jews. No, I go in the museum. You have witches, women, anybody who's doing herbal medicine, right? So it was a very broad thing, right? Anybody who didn't fit, right, in the narrow way of thinking of the Christianity at the time, they would pursue everybody all the way to Colombia, all the way to Latin America. The Inquisition went. It's unbelievable. So, right, today you have a lot of violence associated with the Bible, and I'll give you some examples. You have obviously the notion of abortion, right? Now, the issue is delicate. The issue is not the issues I'm about to give. It's not the problem necessarily with the issue, as it is with the way the issue is being dealt with, right? Again, so you have the abortion, whether it's right or wrong is not the issue here, but it's how it's being dealt with, right? Through the criminalization of women. That's a problem. That's a form of violence, right? And again, irrespective of whether abortion is right or wrong, I'm looking at how this is being dealt with, how the issue is being dealt with, right? And I take issue with the coercive way that the issue is being dealt with. Not so much, I'm not going to do with, you know, whether it's wrong or right to abort, right? Same thing with the notion of LGBT rights, right? Again, the biblical text is some issues, right? But it's not so much the issue, again, it's how it's being dealt with. There are forms of violence, of discrimination that are happening, right? You have now, like I said last time, the the increasingly violent rhetoric of American Christians, right? There's a great bumper sticker. You guys are not from the South, so you don't know, but if you visit the South, you will see a lot of things. And one of these things is this bumper sticker that says Jesus, guns, and babies. Jesus, guns, and babies. It's great. The association of the three are just to delight. So you have this, right? You have also, when it comes to the Middle East, right, you have the use of the biblical text to support war, to support violence. You have this, and we'll talk about this much later when we get into the apocalyptic writings, but you have this in the present Middle East conflict in Gaza. You have a lot of religious rhetoric, right? Of course, you have the politics, which are legitimate, but you also have a mixture here of religious language, which is deeply problematic in my view, right? So, and of course, you have the evangelical right, Christian right in the United States supporting the war, funding the war out of biblical reasons, right? Which we'll study. So you can see how the text is not only has, elements of violence, but is itself seems to be inciting to violence, right? So I want to really highlight the problem, and so that when we get in the text, we know what we're dealing with. We know what we're confronting ourselves to. Okay, so it's interesting. Going back to the notion of biblical values. So what we're going to realize as we get into the text is that the biblical text, what we're going to talk about is not so much the issues, but the way the issues are being implemented. What we're going to see as you read the biblical text is that the biblical text is neither conservative nor liberal. You have elements in the text that sound conservative, and then you have elements that sound liberal. The text is not political in itself, right? Even though we politicize it, the text itself doesn't fit within a political party. There is a party today which, is telling us that they are the Christian party, right? Well, right, there's some problems with that, right? Can the biblical text be narrowed down to a party? I'm looking at a really interesting story. We're gonna maybe look at it, but when Joshua, who is the first conqueror of Canaan, comes at the borders of the land of Canaan. So the conquest is about to begin. He's got the army ready. Canaan is waiting, right? Canaan, just so for those of you who still haven't read, oh, no, yes. Those of you still haven't read, Canaan is what present-day Israel, present-day Palestine was called Canaan in biblical times, right? And this is the conquest of Canaan that we will study a lot. And so Joshua, right, this is right at the beginning of the conquest. He's at the borders of Canaan. And he's kind of preparing himself mentally. He's scared, he's stressed. And all of a sudden appears before him a very powerful man. He looks at this man and he says, who are you? And are you for us or against us, right? And the man replies, I am the captain of the God's armies, and I am neither for you nor against you, right? Very interesting. There's a neutrality. Look at it. It's incredible. In other words, the captain of God's armies is neither for nor against this or that army. It's another level, right? So, but yeah, this very powerful commander kind of strengthens Joshua, gives him some advice, but it's very interesting. There's a biblical neutrality. Already we see that there. It should already ring a bell. There's a divine neutrality when it comes to conflict. God is neither on the side of the Hebrews nor on the side of the Canaanites, and we see this right at the onset, at the beginning of the conquest. There is already a declaration of neutrality, which should already make us think, right? Okay. So let's, as just to summarize, a lot of violence. I think we got it, right? Now, let's look at 3 reactions of commentators to this violence that you see in the text and in the way the text is being used. So there's been 3 main exegetical reactions. Number 1, we abandon the Bible as hopelessly patriarchal. This has been the approach of many feminist commentators, right? A lot of feminist commentators are saying, if you read, they basically say, well, this passage is like this because it's patriarchal, it's hopeless, let's leave it behind, right? Some very, very well-known feminist commentators, serious commentators saying, right, it's hopeless, that they're patriarchal, they can't help it, moving on, right? Let's go, we cannot stay in this text is primitive, it's patriarchal, there's no way out. That's one approach. The other approach, which is also just as shocking in my view, is to submit to the text, right? And justify the violence there as, well, it's God, therefore it's okay. God knows, what he's doing. He's the great, he's in control, he's omniscient, and therefore, it's legitimate what he's doing. Whether we agree or not, it doesn't matter because we are below him. Ethically, he knows what he's doing. So we accept. I have read commentaries. I mean, it's incredible. I've read commentaries on the passages where it says to destroy the children, right? So you have passages, destroy the men, the women, and the children. And I've read commentaries where they say, well, this is all for the good. Because isn't it better that those kids go straight to heaven rather than become evil Canaanites? Unbelievable, right? The kind of commentary you have out there, right? Isn't it better that these kids get murdered and butchered, go straight to heaven, because obviously they're still pure, rather than become evil Canaanites? So justifying divine violence, right, on the grounds that God knows what he's doing, and therefore, we ought to submit to his judgment. Very problematic, right? And then you have a third approach, which will be our approach. And this approach is this notion of questioning and wrestling with the text. So you see, there's two approaches we're not going to follow. One is discarding the text. The other is submitting to the text. Here we stay in the text, we accept the text, but we wrestle with the text, right? And this is an approach which is very, very unusual, especially if you come from a Christian context, right? This is not usually in the Christian context, you read the Bible and you follow the Bible and that's it, right? It's the word of God. Same thing in the Muslim context, right? But here this is very different. I'm going to show you how this is actually the way that the ancient rabbis read the biblical text. And that's the context, right? So to wrestle with the text in order to uncover deeper layers of meaning. Right, so we wrestle not just to wrestle, we wrestle and we push the interpretation, we push the boundaries of the text until we find a satisfactory answer. Okay, that's how we do it. So in other words, you read a text about homosexuality being an abomination. Okay, fine, right? Very clear. Now, as somebody who has friends, or maybe you are, right, dealing with a different type of sexual orientation, you don't feel comfortable with this text. You see what I'm saying? You shouldn't, right? You know people, they're great, they're your friends, or you yourself, right, have this orientation. Now you're feeling discomfort with the text. Now there's two ways to the three approaches. First, you discard the text, it's old, primitive, I'm not going to read it. The second one is God said, therefore, it's an abomination. Three is you go back to the text and you wrestle with it. Okay, what does it mean? Why did God say that? What was the context? Is there a context to this law? What is the context? How can we then understand it, right? It's very interesting because it's as though the text were kind of raw material and we are invited to refine it. This is very unusual. We're going to talk about this in a bit, about the exegesis as dialogical, but this notion that in the rabbinic tradition, right, when the rabbis are interpreting the text, they consider the text to be raw material that needs to be processed so that it is digestible. In other words, there's a story I'll tell you right now so you can see. They compare the biblical text to wheat, right, or barley. Just like that, you cannot eat wheat, right? You want to have what do you have? Indigestion, right? So you have to grind the wheat, you have to bake, you have to knead it, you have to bake it, and then it's edible. That's how the rabbis see the biblical text. It's like a raw material that needs to be grinded, kneaded, baked, and then it becomes. And the role of the interpreter is to refine the biblical text. In other words, here's this law, right? Homosexuality is an abomination. Now it is our role to sift and to grind and to bake and to find what it means, what is going on here, what is the context, can we soften this text, can we refine this text? You see what I'm saying? That's our job. You follow? Now, doesn't mean we move away from the text. We have to stay with the text. So maybe you can ask yourself, are there other texts that say something different? That could be. Or are there stories where I can learn some? Or is there a context here that is behind this law? That's what we do. So it's not about now doing eisegesis, where we kind of put our own meaning in the text. No, you have to follow the text. So there's a double challenge here. On the one hand, the text will challenge us, but on the other hand, we have the duty to challenge the text. You follow me? This is very new. So we need to be quite strong. We have to be strong enough to take the challenge and be like, ah, that sucks, right? This disturbs me. I am disturbed. And the biblical text is a form of violence in itself. It will disturb, supposed to disturb, but then we have the duty also to disturb the text and to question the text and go back and say, I don't like this. Now let me dig deeper. That's the idea, right? Makes sense? That's the thing. Okay, so that's the way. So I want to look at, so you can see a little bit, that's the methodology we're going to adopt. It's a methodology which I call dialogical. Let me write this word. Very important word for our class. What does dialogical mean? Anybody? It's made of two Greek words. What does dia mean? No. Yeah?
I would say
The Greek.
division,
What?
I would say division.
Yes, two, right? Two or division. That's Spanish. Logical? What's logical? Or logos, or Greek?
Logic.
Or discourse, right? This is a discourse which takes place between two. Other word for it, conversation, right? In other words, the biblical approach, the approach that rabbis took was a dialogical approach. There is me and the text, and we're discussing and we are dialoguing. It's not you submerging me, nor me submerging you. It is us wrestling together. That is the dialogical approach. There's two and they're talking, right? And neither one is overpowering the other. We are too used to going to these sacred texts and letting them overpower us. That's not the way that the text was originally read. That's my point, right? I'm not saying now, I'm not inventing a technique. I'm telling you in the context, in the biblical context, that's how the text was read. And that is how the text also was written. We're going to look at this. There are three dialogical moments. Yes. The diamonds. I don't know actually if it's connected.
No, I was saying, what did you say it meant?
Dialogical. This
No, dia. What?
dia is two or divide. Yeah. Okay. So there are three dialogical moments here in the way we're going to approach the text. So number one, revelation is dialogical. Okay, number two, the canon is dialogical. And number three, exegesis is that. Okay, so let me define each word, right? Revelation is the biblical, the teachings, right? The teachings that are revealed, the divine teachings, right? Revelation is where the divine truth. That's what I mean by revelation. It's the divine truth that is being expressed in the text, right? Through the stories and so forth. That's revelation. Canon is the compilation of all the biblical books. Okay, that's what canon means. It's the compilation of all biblical books. So, and then exegesis simply means interpretation. When I say the word exegesis, I mean the interpretation. It's a synonym for interpretation. So now you've learned two words. Interpretation. Okay, so revelation, canon, exegesis, we'll be talking about this. Okay, let's go in the first one. So this, if you're used to studying, if you're coming from a religious background, this is gonna sound strange, what I'm about to say. But bear with me, because if we don't understand this, we're not going to be able to read these texts correctly. So number one, revelation is dialogical, meaning divine truth. This is very interesting. It's not divine truth is being spoken. Okay, so this is not like the Quran, right? The Quran, for example, divine truth is entirely in the text. That's it. It's been said once and for all. End of story. Every word is from God, right? This is very different here. Here, the revelation is dialogical, meaning it's not just the words of God that are going to be divine truth. It is, on the contrary, the product of human and divine word is revelation in the biblical context. It's very interesting. So it's not the divine word that's revelation, it's the product of the human and the divine word that constitute the totality of revelation. So in other words, God is always looking for a dialogue partner when he's doing his thing, right? Going through the earth doing things, right? If he doesn't find, according to the dialogue partner he has, things will take one direction or another. I'll give you examples, right? So, but for now, just make sure you get this, that the revelation is a product of human and divine. In other words, if you have God, so depending on the human partner, God is going to go left or right. It's very interesting because remember, the biblical spirituality is covenant, meaning it's always God and humans working together. It's not God doing his thing and humans obeying. We are not in an authoritarian context in the biblical text. We are in a covenant context. Okay, make sure you get this, right? We are not in an authoritarian context. God is not the authority. God is a partner with another partner. And depending on that partner, God is going to go left or right. It's like you're in a good marriage or in a bad marriage. If you're in a bad marriage, not great. You're not going to go far. If you're in a good marriage, you'll go pretty far. God is in a good or bad marriage, depending on who he's dealing with. You follow? So if he's dealing with a human being who is compassionate, God will move towards compassion. If he's dealing with a human being who is not compassionate or more rigorous, he will go in that direction. So I'll give you examples because this sounds crazy. Okay, let me, yes. So let me say one more thing and then I'll give you 3 examples. So in other words, God will often come to the earth and say stuff. I'm about to do this, he will say. I'm about to do this. For example, if you know the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, hopefully you've read already a little bit, right? You have these 2 cities that were very wicked. And God comes to one of his friends, Abraham, and he says, I just wanted to let you know that I'm about to destroy these cities. And then he steps back and waits. Now, it's interesting. What does Abraham do? He what?
Does he stay in the city or does he leave?
He's outside of the city. Yeah. He goes to his friend who's outside. He's not connected to the city. Yes. Abraham steps in. So God has just said, and then step back. Abraham steps in and says, are you sure you want to do this? All right. Because remember, Abraham has family in that city. So he's a little worried here. So he goes to God and says, are you sure you want to do this? If there's 50 righteous people in the city, are you going to destroy everybody? And God is like, oh, that's a good point. No, I won't. Abraham is like, oh, okay, well, what if there's 40 and 30 and 20? And God each time is like, yeah, no, I won't destroy it. And then finally, Abraham stops at 10, right? And God says, if there's 10 people, I won't destroy it. And at that moment, the rabbis burst into tears. Why? Because what if Abraham had negotiated until 1 or 2? The cities would have been spared, right? Because it turns out there were only 6 righteous people in the city, right? What if he had negotiated all the way? What would have happened? We don't know. Right? Would God have relented and interrupted his judgment because of what this man had? Do you see the power of humanity here in the context, in the process of divine judgment, the power we have over God, right? So Abraham was able to not to interrupt because he didn't negotiate far enough, but he softened the judgment because what did God end up doing? He softened it. Anybody know? Yes?
I was gonna comment on what you said further about what if you negotiate further, like when God wants to give Abraham a space to negotiate, he has, like, cause right there, he's there as creation. And so the reason why Abraham has space to negotiate is because they're walking away, so they can catch up. And as soon as they're finished negotiating, they like blinks and they disappear.
Yep.
So the walking away gives them space to disappearing implies that you can't go any further.
Oh, okay. So God kind of interrupted the conversation. That's going. Okay. I like what you're saying, but that's a midrash. In other words, that's you're interpreting already, right? It's an interpretation. It works. But another interpretation would be simply God was there. They're walking, but away to we don't know in which direction, right? So there's a little bit of imaginative here, which is fine. But in the text itself, when you read, there's no indication that God interrupts, right? So I would argue that you can also see it like that. So how did he soften the judgment? Anybody know what happens next? What does God do next? Yeah,
He, well, he's telling the angels to actually search for themselves if they're righteous people. They give the people a chance to somehow attack them, and they don't. People end up attacking them, so the angels, again, in the kind of self-decision, still give Lot the opportunity to leave. So there.
exactly, right? Remember, right? So so God sends two angels to the city to investigate. So there's an investigation, right, to see if there's any righteous people, and they end up saving 6. So they destroy the city, but 6 people are saved. It's a softening of the judgment. We have, in other words, the whole story is made up of both divine and human word here. And the human word can soften the divine judgment. I want you to remember this because this is going to be crucial as we start to read more about divine judgment. God is going to be making a lot of judgments, like, I'm going to kill you, I'm going to destroy this, I'm going to ravage this, destroy this country, right? But here we see for the first time, Revelation is dialogical. God is always partnering with someone. And there's always a possibility, depending on who he's partnering with, whether it's Joshua or Moses or Abraham, right? You will see he's always partnering with someone. The Apostle John in the book of Revelation, there's always a possibility of softening. Now, there's also a possibility of hardening the judgment. Here's another story that the rabbis deplore. Very similar to the story of Abraham, you have the story of the flood, which we'll study. God, same scenario, God comes to Noah, tells him, by the way, I thought you should know, I'm about to destroy the world. Okay, now what happens? For those of you who know the story, what does Noah do? Does he do like Abraham or does he do something else?
So I'm correctly, God ordered him to build the ark. And after several years, Noah does build the ark. I believe that he kept warning the people of God's judgment.
He was talking to the people, he was building the ark, he was an obedient steward. But what didn't he do that Abraham did? He didn't bargain with, he didn't talk back. Sorry, what? He didn't talk back, right? He just kept his peace, right? In other words, you have a very different approach. Now imagine God look at this. We have to really measure what just happened. Imagine God comes to you one day and says, I'm going to destroy the world. What would you have the decency to do, hopefully? Would you be like, cool, no problem, let me know when you're ready, right? What would you do, hopefully? Hopefully. Yes, right? You'd be like, whoa, right? You'd be thinking of all these people, you'd be like, right? Noah didn't have the decency to do that. Noah just followed orders. And the rabbis, for this reason, loathe him. There's rabbinic stories deploring Noah's pathetic reaction to God. And the text itself is also hinting to that when we read it. And so here, because the human partner is absent, you have a hardening of the divine judgment. And everybody is wiped out except Noah's family. They make it out, right? A terrible story, right? Very, very. So that's an example of the divine judgment being really, there's no dialogue, and so it's complete destruction, right? The human partner is missing, and so you have this ravage, right? Or this massacre. Okay. And then you even have the interruption. Is it interruption? Yeah, interruption of the divine judgment. So we have a hardening, a softening, but we can also revoke the divine decree. Do you have any examples of this? God said, I'm going to do this. And then human being pipes up and God revokes it. Yes.
I think it's after like the golden calf situation.
Yes.
Moses kind of intercedes on behalf of the great people of God. God says, I'm going to destroy the whole community, and Moses says, and don't do that, and take me out of your book. I don't want to be involved. And then God chooses not to.
Exactly. One of the most beautiful examples of intercession, which we'll come to. Same scenario. God comes to a human being, says, I will destroy these people and make you okay, right? And unlike Noah, who's like, cool, let's go, let's build the ark. Moses says, no, kill me first. You will never touch these people. And the decree is overturned. We have the power to overturn the divine decree. Nothing is ever set in stone when God speaks, because he is speaking to someone always. He's not just, blaring his commands, right? He's speaking to someone, and that person can answer, can talk back, right? That's what it means when I say revelation is dialogical. In other words, God speaks, but there's always the possibility of softening, hardening, or revoking the divine decree. This is foundational now for what we're about to investigate when it comes to violence in the Bible, which always comes from God, it seems, right? But it'll be more and more subtle. But for now, make sure you get this down. Everybody understands this, right? This is very important. This is very different from what we're used to, right? We're used to God says and I follow, right? And most religions are like this. God speaks and we follow. Not here, right? This is God is seeking partnership. He's taking the wager of partnership. And in that sense, I always tell people God is not omnipotent, nor is he omniscient, and nor is he all-loving, because he depends on us. And we can shift. He never knows what we're going to do next, right? He depends on us to do his business in the world. So he's not omnipotent. In a way, his hands are tied by the idiot with whom he's working. If the person is compassionate, okay, right? So in a way, God has intentionally limited his power and allowed us to step in and be part of the whole process of revelation. Do you measure this? This is incredible, powerful truth, which we need in order to get into this. Okay. So make sure you wrote this down, because I will come back to this notion as we go into the wars and all the massacres and all that. Okay, good. Let's go to the second one, which is the canon is dialogical. In other words, the composition, the compilation of all the biblical books. So the canon is the whole Bible, which you know is not just one big book. It's many different books, right? Written by many different authors throughout a large span of time, right? So this is a little known fact in general in religious circles, that the Bible also wrestles with itself, right? So the different books of the Bible sometimes challenge each other. So you don't, like I said last time, the Bible doesn't speak in one voice. It is not how I would call it monological, right? It's not a monological book. We have dialogical, monological. What does it mean, monological? What's mono? One. Okay, so it's not one voice, right? It's at least dialogical, two voices or more, right? So the canon itself will have books which contradict other books. So you will have books that are incredibly racist and ethnocentric and patriarchal, and then you will have books that are incredibly open to the stranger, that are incredibly matriarchal, all in the same canon. And sadly, we haven't really looked at this, right? Because like I said, the readership of the Bible has been Western and it has been male. So we miss often the other voices, right? If you're not yourself looking there for some resonance, you're not going to find them, right? It started, thankfully, in the 20th century when there was more female readership. We started to discover within the biblical text all of these matriarchal voices, all of these powerful feminine voices that were always there, but the male readership would kind of, it wasn't they were more focused on other things, right? So obviously, not that they were wrong, but the focus was different. So once you have more females reading the Bible, you start to see, oh my gosh, there's so many women's voices here, so many powerful feminine figures, right? So we have to understand that, right? So the Bible, yes, to a certain degree is patriarchal, for sure. It's ethnocentric, it can be very violent, but then you have whole books that are matriarchal, welcoming to the stranger, and what was the third thing? Pacific. How do we say that word again? Pacific. Pacifist. Say it again. Pacifist. Okay, pacifist. So non-violent pacifist, right? Okay, so I'll give you some examples that we're going to study. So, for example, Book of Joshua, which hopefully you've started reading. You guys should have started reading some of these books already. Okay, Book of Joshua, very violent. It's all about war. It's incredibly ethnocentric. What matters is the people of Israel. The rest, we destroy them, right? And so forth. And then you will see the Book of Ruth, which is the exact opposite, right? There you have a woman who belongs to a group who is a sworn enemy of Israel. and she is welcomed into a small community, into a village. It's kind of a small story. And she transforms the village, and she brings new life to that village, kind of showing that, okay, these people we have been massacring, they can also give us life, right? We have been thinking they're so toxic and disgusting, and they're so violent and wicked, we ought to destroy them. But at the same time, there's a story about one of these people bringing new life to a community, right? So it's complete opposite, right, worldview, right? On the one hand, they're so wicked, we have to exterminate them. On the other hand, one of these wicked, right, one member of this wicked group we welcome them, and they have refreshed and renewed our community, right? So and we'll see that in the book of Jonah and in the book of Job. These are the subverting books that subvert the worldview in the books of Deuteronomy and Joshua that we talked about. Okay, so we'll see this. Any questions so far or comments before we get to the last dialogical? Okay. All right. So this is what we mentioned. Exegesis also is dialogical, interpretation. In other words, and this is what I said earlier, as interpreters, we are called not just to read and to accept, right? We are called to wrestle with the text. Of course, we allow ourselves to be challenged by the text, but we ought to also challenge the text. And I'll tell you why. If we don't do this, we will miss many of the deeper meanings of the biblical text. In other words, we have to understand that unlike the Quran, for example, where every word is from God, so there's a purity in the Quran that we don't have in the biblical text, right? The biblical text, you have the divine truth trying to make its way through the human dross, right? Am I saying that right? Dross. What do I mean by dross? What's dross? I know. No, it's like yeah. No, okay, so it's like the human matter, kind of. In other words, imagine you're trying to pour water and there's a lot of rocks. The water will try to flow here and there, but it's not going to flow freely. You follow me? If you have like a mountain of rocks, it's going to go like, this is the same way, right? God is speaking, kind of trying to reveal himself, but he's moving through human matter, which often is coarse and rough and wicked, right? And so forth. And so very often the truth, the divine light is caught up in the human, a kind of a human shell. You follow me? A kind of a coarseness that surrounds it, because it's working through us. And if we're messed up, it's going to be messed up, right? So when we challenge the text, when we wrestle with it, very often what it does is starts to sift through the human element to get to the divine element. You follow me? We have to learn to sift. In the text is not perfect. This is not the Quran where every word is divine. Here we have a mingling of the human and the divine, and very often of wickedness and goodness. And we have to sift. And the questioning of the text is one of the ways that you can sift the text powerfully in order to get to a deeper layer of truth. Does that make sense? So we have to do it. Just like the text, by the way, sifts us. When you allow yourself to be challenged by the text, it will sift you. Part of you, will have to shift. Part of you will be put in question. You'll be uncomfortable. You'll have to shed aspects of yourself to really be able to connect to the text, right? That's good. But likewise, the text must shed aspects of itself in order to be able to connect with us. And the questioning does that. Okay. Good. So I think you're following a little bit yes, you have a question. The interpretation is dialogical, meaning we are.
One of the relation to which the canon and is exegesis.
Exegesis
Oh,
or interpretation is dialogical. Right? Makes sense? Okay, any questions? This is a lot of big words. Everybody understand where I'm going? Yeah? Yes, question.
I like the approach and, but you said that part of the original tradition to explore that third option. Style that you thinking. But I wonder if there's like, um, parallel when you see in the New Testament descriptions of like Jewish people interpreting the text of the right and not being so dialogical.
In the New Testament,
Yeah.
where
So I do see some examples that do support this approach in the New Testament. But yeah, like there still seems to be the spirit of also like taking it more literally. Like, yeah, God said this and therefore the law is this. There's no like.
do you have an example?
Uh,
An example would be like when trying the woman they
Right.
say that
Yeah.
Moses said that we just.
thank you. Yeah, yeah.
But you missed the whole other side of the story.
Or the Sabbath, right?
Yeah. But again, you guys are missing it. You're situating Jesus outside of the rabbinic context. He's not. He's part of the rabbinic context. And from that context, he's offering a challenge,
I agree that, you know, that's one way to look at it.
right?
but-
You got to see them
but
together.
the people he's talked to though, didn't seem like they were so dialogical.
Well, they admit a point. And see, we don't often understand this. When the Pharisees were testing Jesus, right? It wasn't to, to trap him. It was very often to see how profound are you? How good are you at this? And very often they enjoyed being challenged, right? Now, some of the people you're talking about, there was also another component here, which is a political component of wanting to maintain power. That falsifies the whole approach, right? And you had some of that, but you also had Pharisees who, Jesus would say, well answered, or who would say, I like that answer, even though it was different from what they. So what you guys are doing is situating Jesus outside of the dialogical. He's part. This is normal. You got to see him as part of the context where Pharisee will say one thing and he will challenge, and it's perfectly normal. This is exactly, if you look at other rabbinic debates, they're exactly like that. In fact, during the time of Jesus, you had two schools that were always fighting. The house of Hillel and the house of Shammai. These were two rabbinic schools, and they were constantly arguing exactly like they would do with Jesus. So we always see Jesus, this kind of, being of light, constantly attacked. It's not what was going on. This was cultural. They would always, kind of test each other and see how far, and they would challenge each other. And it was absolutely normal that Jesus, some of what he's saying, you can find in the Talmud. Some of what he's saying, other rabbis were saying, and in challenge of other rabbis. You see what I'm saying? So we tend to put Jesus outside of the context where he was right there at home. You follow me? So I would argue that all of these stories are dialogical, actually.
To be fair, say though that both styles existed even back then from people who were more fundamentalist thinking.
Yeah, you have all schools of thought in the biblical text. You have fundamentalists, you have liberals, and but what's beautiful about it is that nobody gets kicked out. See, the sad thing that I deplore sometimes, and we've talked about this with Davidov, is that Jesus was kicked out of the Talmud, kicked out of the Jewish writings, where he was such an integral part of the discussion in the first century, right? So that's not Jewish in my view, right? What just happened. But in general, you have you have strong fundamentalist positions, feminist voices, but they all sit at the table, right? There's an interesting festival in Judaism called Passover. Have you heard about it, everybody? It's like Easter, right? And what they do is they have everybody at the table, and at one point they have a ritual which involves 4 children. And the 4 children have very different personalities. One is very young, is very naive. One is very smart, the other one is kind of eager to learn. And then you have a fourth child called the wicked child, right? And all of these 4 children are invited to ask a question, to participate in the ritual. And I've always been amazed that the wicked child was given a seat at the table, right? And this is very typical. Everyone has a seat, fundamentalists, liberals, Orthodox, people who like Jesus, right? All there, right, are supposed to be part because we are in this context of talking to each other and wrestling with each other, right? And we're supposed to be conversing and there should never be a conclusion, right? We should never stop in a conclusion. Yes.
There are some interpretations that say that fifth child is not mentioned because that's a child that chose to not be at the table.
Ah, interesting.
That's,
So even he is acknowledged, right?
that's what the Jewish tradition thinks, a lot of the Christian tradition. The reason why it's not in the canon is because it chose to not be in the canon.
That's a possibility. You're probably right, actually. Yeah, that's interesting. I'm curious about that. Can you, after class, tell me more about that? The fact that they're not in the canon because they chose not to be in the canon. That's, or maybe you can say some words now.
And I don't know the specifics, 'cause I'm not like that read up on the history, but there's Jewish sentiments of things that are worship or idolize, even if before they were completely fine, they turn into idols. Virtue of being worshipped.
Yeah.
So there's a kind of idea of that, okay, Jesus might have been a completely kosher, completely normal dude, but the fact that so much of the world has engaged in this form of worship has made it so that he's no longer ours, he's been stolen.
That's interesting. Yeah, I've heard that too, that the Christians actually started to distance themselves because a lot of them were Greeks, right? And they were like, yeah, I don't want to be associated with these Jews, right? So they themselves actually, thank you. Good pushback. Yes, go ahead.
He is mentioned sometimes in the Talmud.
Yeah, but how?
It's to see, like, there are a lot of it, the majority of the rabbis saying, you know, whether or not his actual opinion was legitimate, like they disparage.
Yeah, they do.
It's interesting that his opinions are still there. even though
Are his
they're-
opinions there or just his
Sometimes.
character is
Yeah.
disparaged?
There are it'll give him a different name, but it's very obvious, and like a lot of times the Rashi will say, this was an opinion of Jesus.
Oh, okay.
So it's interesting to look at.
What's the name that they give?
I don't know. I don't know it
That's
offhand, but
curious.
they call
Okay.
him by different names.
Yeah.
Very
And you can,
obvious
it's
that
code,
it's-
right? And you can understand. All right. So fair enough. All right. So I need to, I would love to see more of that. If you can find out what is
I
the
can-
name.
I can look it up.
Yeah, I'd be very curious. Good. Okay, good. Now, let's get into a little deeper into this wrestling. I want to go over, still talking in the context of how the rabbis interpret the Bible. You have actually 4 techniques of interpretation, and we're going to touch on all 4 as we interpret the text. And what I was talking about, the dialogical, the wrestling, is only one of those techniques of interpretation. So here are the 4. And we'll do a little bit of Hebrew today. So you'll learn 4 Hebrew words and I would learn them because I will be using them as I'm lecturing. Okay, so first I'll do in capital letters. So the Pshat. So, okay, these are 4 layers of interpretation. Let me talk about each one. And make sure you review those terms because I will use them as we move from layer to layer. Okay, pshat simply means simple, literal. So this is, you read the text, it says this, okay, that's what it says. No wrestling, no thinking deeper, no context, self-explanatory, right? God says you won't kill, you don't kill. Very simple, pshat, okay? God says it's an abomination, it's an abomination, pshat, right? God says I will destroy the world, he will destroy it's him. Right, you follow? So the pshat is a literal, you read and whatever it says is, that's what you understand. So most people read the text like this, right? Most churches, right, read the text like this. There's no deeper layers. Well, most when I mean churches, I mean, or synagogues, when you're in the kind of just for the people, right? When you're teaching, not going very sophisticated, you usually do the pshat. Okay. Now, remez, now it's a little more sophisticated. At this point, you know Hebrew or you know Greek, you know the literary devices that the authors are using to express what they're trying to say, because very often, especially in the Hebrew Bible, the writers, they're going to have a certain literary device they use to say something. So for example, there's going to be a certain structure, and in that structure, you can already decipher meaning. Right, so it's not just the words, you have to also learn to read the structure, to read the poetic devices that the authors use, because they're already expressing meaning in the poetic devices, in the way they structure the text, in the way that they craft the text there is already meaning. You follow? So it's not just the words, it's the way they're crafted. And when we study the book of Job, you're going to see some remez. So for that, you already know you need Hebrew, you need Greek, you need to know the literary devices. I will be bringing some of that in class, right? The drash is the wrestling with the text. This is when you come to the text and you have questions and discomforts, and therefore you're going to look deeper, right? Remember, the discomfort shouldn't be that which separates us. On the contrary, discomfort is an indication, or conflict, right, is an indication that something can be, there's deeper truth, right, that we need to reach together. So the drash you're going to be doing in the class. And the reading assignment, actually, I think I'll change it based on what I'm saying right now. Yeah, I'm changing it. Sorry, changing the reading assignment. Remember the assignments we talked about last time, where you have to do 1 page, single space, 2 paragraphs? I'm changing it to 4 paragraphs, and you're gonna do 2 questions, 2 critiques. So you're gonna, instead of giving kind of a, yeah, I like this, you're gonna
Next round.
no, not yet. In the time after that.
Huh?
The time after that, not next time, but the time after. Okay, so jot this down, right? That the reading assignment, you're gonna look at the text and you're gonna look 2 things that you don't understand, that you, for example, what does that word mean, or why does he repeat himself, or you need to notice the details.
What text?
Next time we don't do a text yet, so don't worry about it. Next time is still introduction. And again, please remember, you're supposed to raise your hand, right? Don't blurt out like this. Raise your hand and then, thanks. Okay, so you have the 4, so let me just be more precise. When you have to look at the text and pay attention to the details, right? Whenever the author is writing and he puts a detail where you're like, why is he talking about that here? You want to zoom in on that and be like, why? Right? So there's a way to read which will begin to uncover the deeper layers. And as you guys ask your questions, and I'm going to look at your questions and we'll discuss your questions here, we will get into deeper layers of interpretation we would never have found if we had stuck to the pshat or the remez, right? So you will notice that this way of proceeding with questions actually is a way to drill deeper into the text. And I will have 2 challenges. So 2 questions about the text. You're puzzled. Why does he have this detail? Why is there a repetition? Blah, blah, blah. And then what challenges you? What disturbs you? Are you disturbed here by something? And that's how we're going to learn to do drash. Yes.
Questions for.
And so 1 page, 4 paragraphs, 2 questions, 2 critiques. 2 critiques or 2 challenges, right? Okay. Great. And then the last one is the sod. Sod is the mystical interpretation, which we won't get so much into, right? That's a reading which is already, everything is allegorical. For example, I'll give you an example of the mystical interpretation. How many of you are familiar with the Song of Songs? Okay, not all. Y'all need to start reading. I need to be able to find people who understand what I'm saying. Okay, Song of Songs is kind of an erotic poem in the Bible about a man and a woman, and it's all about, how beautiful they are and blah, blah, blah. Okay, so the rabbis were a little uncomfortable with this text because it's very graphic, very sexual. And so they gave it a mystical interpretation. And they said, it's not about a man and a woman. God forbid, it's about God and Israel. They love each other so much. And every single moment of the text is allegorized. For example, it talks at one point about her eyes are like doves. And then the Christians jump in and like, that's the Holy Spirit, right? And so forth. So, and then Jewish interpretation does something similar. So that's a much, very profound way of reading the text as saying something much deeper than what is actually going on. But we won't go so much into that here. So that's the 4 layers. And so you can begin to see that the text, we have stayed at the surface for centuries. We have never really tried to go more deeply, and that's why we completely miss it at times. Was there a question? I thought I saw a question somewhere. No? Okay, good. Yeah. Yeah, remez is grammar, biblical language. So here the author is using a lot of literary devices. He's structure. There's certain poetic rhythms. There's repetitions, parallelisms. These Writing style, exactly. So you have to know that to also understand the text, right? But this, I will be more the one giving you that, right? From the original. You need to know Hebrew or Greek, right? How people write. So that's the writing style. We need to, that's also important to get to the meaning. But we as a class will be doing drush, the wrestling, and getting deeper into the text, which is the philosophical approach, right? Since we're in a philosophy class. Okay. Okay, last thing, I just want to, yeah. So you will see very quickly. So we'll have one more lecture like this, and that's it. Because after that, we'll be working much more together. Like I told you, this is going to be more of a lab than a lecture. I will lecture, but there will be a lab component where we are really wrestling with the text together. First together among yourselves, and then here in the class, and then I'll offer something, right? So which is why I wanted a nice conference room. This is all right, I suppose, but still it's like I feel so far from you. It's so much better when there's like a table, like, anyways, that's fine. I'll suck it up. It's taken. Yeah, all the rooms are taken. It's so sad. Yeah. Oh, well. So yeah, good. All right. So for next time, I will introduce, so for next time, please read the book of Genesis. Right? Get the book of Genesis down, skim through it, right? We're gonna read the first 11 chapters, but next, so make sure you read a little bit. At least, let's see, what am I going to talk about? So I can at least orient you what to focus on. Yeah. Well, we have, let's see. Yeah, read at least the whole book of Genesis by next time. I mean, it's not assignment or nothing, but just skim through it so you have an idea. You should already remember, start reading those books I mentioned, right? Really try to get so that we're not a class of ignorant people, but we can follow. So, but focus on Genesis, because next time I will introduce the book of Genesis and how to read those first 11 chapters. So I will be in the class focusing on Genesis 1 through 11. So you can focus on that if you want, but read a little further. And that's what I'll be doing next time. And then we will have our first. So I haven't done a syllabus. I mean, I have the syllabus, but I guess I'll post it, but it should be a bit fluid because depending on how fast we go and so forth. So it's not set in stone. It's not the 10 commandments. So I'll put it on Brightspace. You'll have something, but I reserve the right to modify it as we go along, based on how fast we go. Okay, any last questions? We have we have 2-3 minutes. Any last questions or disturbances or worries or? All right, good. So I'll see you in a few days for the book, Introduction to the Book of Genesis. So no assignments yet, just read.